Now I'm not on TikTok as I was in Bowen Mountain Part 1. I can take my time sharing the story rather than trying to squeeze it into 3 minutes, which I find a little bit stressful. So, Bowen Mountain Part 2. The place I grew up in, we moved there in 1978, I think, late 78. Uh, and it was really sparsely settled. I mean, if you go up there now, there's houses everywhere. But back then, I think there was one house past us towards the fire trail that the Crago Observatory is down. And in particular, where my wife lives, where I was just sharing that story before, there was no houses on her street for a number of years. There was just nothing else was built there. So when I talk about things that were happening around that house, you've got to remember there was no neighbours to come and actively participate in any of that. And when she saw that light come around the back of the house, um, you'd think the only light coming up would be your parents' car. So just kind of qualifying that. So a little bit of the history of Bowen Mountain. It's a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to go and visit there, take the time to head to the Hawkesbury if you're from sort of Sydney, and just kind of head up from the RAF base, kind of North Richmond up through Grosse Vale, and then keep going. You'll get to Bowen Mountain. If you're coming from the western region of New South Wales, you come through Bells Liner Road and turn off at Currajong, and that will take you up to Bowen Mountain. It was a convict settlement. Lieutenant Bowen had teams of convicts and workers, and what they wanted to establish down the fire trail at the Burralow Creek was a settlement, like a farm. So there's still structures, and there's actually still some wild pigs and wild cows and things like that seen from time to time down there that were brought in as introduced species to build this, but it never eventuated. So Bowen Mountain was a place that people moved to find affordable housing, who were willing to drive down the mountain to go to work. It was at high risk of bushfires. Everyone was on tank water. Everyone was on sewerage. Like you had to have your own pump out and things like that. So when you lived at Bowen Mountain, you lived a different life than if down in town. When I first got there, everything seemed to be fine. Not a worry in the world. Loved growing up there. Had motorcycles, had air rifles. There was bush everywhere. There was bushwalks everywhere. And my future wife, who was I think 6 when we first met, lived down the road. And her and my family and her brother and all the other kids used to just play constantly out in the bush. But it was the adults that talked about some of the supernatural aspects of Bowen Mountain. And we first started hearing it from our parents and our neighbours, who would share stories of things like going for walks at night, really brave guys that would just go running from Bowen Mountain to Bilpin, a couple of times a week, coming back and shaking and saying, I'm never going to go walk around this neighbourhood at night again. And they wouldn't disclose why. They'd just say something happened and I'm not keen. One of the things that I think changed or created a sequence of events was, and I won't name which family, but an Aboriginal Cheringa stone was found, and it was brought into their house. So that's a stone it's a ceremonial stone that's used, and it was on buried under a track that a grader had gone over to expand the fire trail, and it was just poking out of the ground, and somebody found that stone. It's a beautiful stone. I've seen it. I've held it. I've actually prayed over it, and they dug it up, and then they created a little wooden altar and they put it in the house. And the reason I'm linking this stone to other parts of the story is that when I timelined it with the person who dug it up, it begins the moment or the year that they bring it into their house. So this stone that I grew up seeing on the mantelpiece, that it's a wonderful looking thing. It's got beveled edges. It looks like it's been laser cut. It's just to think that this was created by people that were considered to be primitive is just unbelievable. So we'd see this stone, and then over time we'd hear the stories of what was happening, what was manifesting in the house. So the first thing that started was massive fist knocks on the house. Now you've got to remember, this was the last house on the street. It was sparsely populated. On the other side was just bush that literally went almost all the way to Lithgow, and on the other side was bush that would have gone right through to all the Blue Mountains, Megalong Valley. So there's just nothing there. So there was this massive fist pumping bangs on the walls of the house where the stone was kept, and on the doors, and there was just no one there to play knock and run. It was just one of those neighbourhoods that we were all asleep at 8:30 at night because we were little kids, and if a car came, you heard it, and the dogs would bark. It was just really strange. Then we started finding termite nests that had been ripped open, so torn open, had sticks shoved in them, and you had to know where these nests were to find them. It's not something you could just find on the track. You had to go off the track and know where they specifically were. The other things that were observed around there were these little rock stacks that were everywhere. Just rock stacks that if you knew where to go and look for them, you'd find that somebody or something had just piled rocks up. My wife and I, well, my future wife, I should say, I certainly wasn't married to when I was 10, we were playing handball out the front of this house that my mother-in-law lived in, and we just had a sense that we were being watched. You just have that, you just look up for no real good reason other than you feel like somebody's looking at you. And I can't remember the sequence of who asked the question first because it's a long time ago now, but the question was, what is that? What is that? And up over the road, standing next to a tree, was what I could only describe as like a giant man, covered with hair, like really sort of low neck, and was observing us. It was like to put a height on it would be difficult, but 3 foot taller than me, and I'm just under 6 foot. And it was watching us, and we both looked at each other, and we were like, "Did you see that?" And then we looked back, and we kind of looked at each other, and then we looked back, and it was gone. And so we were kind of thinking, like years later, is that thing drawn to this area because of this stone? And was that the thing that was tearing apart the termite nests and poking sticks in it? Is that the thing that was banging on the walls? We just didn't know. But I know that from that moment onwards, I was really scared to go walking into the bush. So for me, part of the test of, was this real? Was this imagination? Was this really, really bad sense of foreboding when I went into the bush? One time my brother's motorcycle I was riding, it just broke down. A brand new bike, but just suddenly stopped working, and I got off it and I couldn't get it going, and was overwhelmed with fear. Not far from where this event happened, and just had a full-blown panic attack. It's something I'd never experienced up until that point. But there's something about that place, and there was something there that wasn't just, this is my imagination. I felt at all times while we were down the bush that potentially we weren't alone. The other thing that happened was the event I was talking about, where one night, while two young people were waiting for their mother to come home, the TV started changing channels by itself, and it was a manual change. It wasn't like today where we have digital. This thing didn't seem to be glitching because the channels were changing. That required pressure on the buttons. Simultaneously, the phone was ringing, and they'd pick up the phone, and there'd be no one there. Then it'd start ringing again. You pick it up, no one's there. You put it down. So the channels are changing. Simultaneously, the phone's ringing, and nobody's there. And then a ball of light, described as a ball of light, came up around the side of the house, and was just thought to be headlights. There was just no explanation for this bright light that sort of seemed to come up and over the house and around the back. And you've got to remember, there was no houses around the back. This was it. And so the young lady ran out the back and bravely up these concrete stairs where, even today, you sort of walk up there at night and you think, oh, I'm not keen. And there was nothing. There wasn't a car. There wasn't just nothing there, and just sort of ran back down to the house. The other story I always remember was the convict wells that were in the park. They used to put the convicts in there at night time so they wouldn't escape. But my brother-in-law and his friends were playing down there, and he had no reason to tell me this story. Like, he had no reason to make it up. And in fact, because he's my brother-in-law, I've got to ask him a number of times about it. They were playing around the park and they saw a big orb of light, like a perfect sphere of light, just seemed to drop down from the sky and sit above the ground. And then it came racing at them. So it was floating above the ground. I don't know how many feet. And these guys, they all did martial arts. They were sort of like, they're really sporty guys. They weren't scared of anything in the bush, and they just bolted out of the park. They just did a runner. Other things that happened, and maybe should be left for another video, but suffice to say, there was lots of activity around witchcraft and the occult. There was later on stories of lots of Black Panther sightings. Interestingly enough, I've never personally heard of a UFO sighting at Bowen Mountain. But we had our house prayed for by the priest. He came up after school one day and prayed in our house. And so for me personally, apart from seeing that hairy man across the road, and that encounters on the AYR, the Australian Yowie Research page, 1982 Bowen Mountain, that story's there. Dean Harris and his team do some really, really good work on that database. Apart from that, I never really had anything supernatural happen. My wife, when she was a child, would walk across her hallway to go to the bathroom and see phantom people, like convicts, old-fashioned people, she called them, walking through the hallway, and she couldn't get across to go to the bathroom until they went. And that was a repetitive thing that happened, and she's not prone to anything supernatural. She's not prone to telling any stories. She is the ultimate, no, I wouldn't say skeptic, but she just doesn't view the world through probably the same lens that I do at times. So there's no reason for her to embellish that or make it up. But no, she is stuck by that story, and her parents, her mum now, has referenced that story back a number of times. That's why she wouldn't do it. So, you know what? I never tell you what to think. I'm just sharing with you things that happen. That's Bowen Mountain Part 2. If you ever get a chance to go there, there's a magnetic hill there as well. I've seen that working, but I think it's an optical illusion. But it's just a beautiful place to go for a bushwalk. Go down to Currajong. There's some really good restaurants down there. Take the family up there. Go for the bushwalk. Go down to the Devil's Hole Creek, which we call the first creek. To go down the Burrellow Creek, you can take a right-hand turn and go up to Currajong Heights. There's lots and lots of bushwalks down the south end. And you can finish the day by just going to Currajong, enjoying the shopping and the restaurants there. A beautiful place. I love going back there. Anyway, God bless and enjoy your day.